Welcome to the None But Curious podcast. We're all about finding inspiration in life's uncertainties. Whether you're still figuring things out, questioning your beliefs, or just curious about the world, come hang out with us as we celebrate the beauty of not having all the answers. Somewhere on Mount Olympus right now, in the version of this that exists only in myth, Hera is still mad about something Zeus did 3,000 years ago. Apollo is sulking. Ares wants a fight nobody asked for. And you, right here, right now, are expecting to have your life more together than that, which is a pretty ambitious expectation. Because these gods and goddesses are not exactly role models. They're not even trying to be. Zeus is jealous and impulsive. Hera holds grudges for generations. Aphrodite starts wars over vanity. Poseidon sulks when he doesn't get enough respect, and then the ocean pays for it. An entire civilization looked at the forces running the universe and essentially said, "Woo! Oh well, they're a hot mess. They're petty, jealous, impulsive. Yeah, they should be in charge." A little too close to home, right? Now, a lot of traditions that came after worked hard to smooth their divine figures into something closer to perfection. All good, all wise, all controlled. Which is a beautiful aspiration, but then it creates a problem. When you feel petty or jealous, or like you want to pick a fight that nobody asked for, where exactly are you supposed to put that? You just feel like you're failing at being a person. So we look at these myths and we often treat them as ancient explanations for why the world is the way it is, why the seasons change, why storms happen, why people fall in love, why bad things happen to good people. And yeah, the stories do some of that. But maybe they were also trying to explain something a little stranger. Us. Before anyone had words like psychology or personality or impulse control, the Greeks had Ares. Ares isn't just war, he is the part of you that wants to argue before you've even figured out what you're arguing about. Aphrodite is the part of you that sees a beautiful face and suddenly starts making decisions your calendar is absolutely going to regret. Athena is different. She's the part that pauses, assesses, plans. She's 3 moves ahead while everyone else is still trying to figure out what game you're playing. And even the way Athena comes into the world tells us something. She's not born as a baby who slowly grows into wisdom. She bursts fully formed from Zeus's head. No childhood, no awkward adolescence, no years of figuring things out, just boom! Wisdom, fully armored and ready for work. Out of all the ways a storyteller could imagine wisdom entering the world, they chose this one. Not a slow accumulation of experience, but a flash of insight. The kind that seems to arrive all at once after you've been confused for weeks and weeks and weeks. And maybe that's why these stories have lasted. Not because they explain how storms work, because they recognize that a single human being could contain wildly different ways of moving through the world. Sometimes it feels like they're all taking turns at the controls, and perhaps this is where the gods become a little more useful. You don't even have to believe they're real. Some of you probably don't believe a single one of them existed, and that's okay. You don't need Olympus to recognize the experience of having several very different people living inside your own head. There's the part of you that wants to be admired, the part of you that wants to pick a fight before breakfast, the part that's already made a 5-step plan while everyone else is still looking for the instructions, the part that wants to throw the whole schedule away and just dance in the kitchen. We tend to call these contradictions, or moods, or flaws. The Greeks gave them names. And naming a part of yourself doesn't mean letting it off the hook. It means you can finally see who's been making the decisions. It's the difference between asking, "Why do I keep doing this?" and realizing, oh, you're the one driving today. And sometimes there isn't just one at the control. Take Apollo and Dionysus. Apollo is the part of us that wants things clear, reasonable, ordered, knowable. He is the straight line, the measured response, the desire to understand before we act. Dionysus wants almost none of that. Dionysus is wine and theater and music, bodies moving together. He's the part of human experience where the boundaries get really blurry, where you stop monitoring yourself quite so carefully. And the Greeks did something really interesting with these two. They didn't decide which one was mature. They didn't build a temple to Apollo and then act a little embarrassed about Dionysus. They made room for both. Because human beings need both structure and release. Too much Apollo, and your life can become a beautifully organized cage. Too much Dionysus, and eventually someone has to go find your shoes. The point isn't to eliminate one, it's to notice which one you've been overfeeding. And that idea shows up all over these myths. The gods don't become better people. Zeus doesn't suddenly develop excellent boundaries. Hera doesn't wake up one morning and decide, let bygones be bygones. Ares doesn't discover mindfulness. They all remain themselves. Petty, jealous, impulsive, lustful, vain. Sometimes generous, sometimes cruel, but frequently convinced that whatever they're doing is completely reasonable. Somehow the world continues. Kind of reassuring, because we spend an enormous amount of our lives imagining that we need to become some finished version of ourselves before we're allowed to fully participate in our own lives. We'll be less anxious someday, more disciplined, more confident, more patient, less reactive, better at communicating. And then finally, we'll be ready. But the world doesn't wait. You don't have to finish becoming yourself before you get to live. The question isn't whether you have contradictions. Of course you do. The question is whether you can notice them. And the Greeks had a story for what happens when we encounter something we can't control. Pandora. She opens the jar and suffering enters the world. Sickness, grief, labor, aging. Ugh. All the things human beings would probably prefer to put right back in the jar. And then there's hope, still sitting there right at the bottom. And nobody can quite agree on what that means. Is hope the gift that remains after everything terrible has escaped? Or is it the cruelest thing in the jar? Something that keeps us reaching toward a better future even when we can't guarantee one? The story doesn't tell us. And that's important because sometimes we want mythology to tell us what everything means. We want the lesson, we want the moral, we want somebody to explain what happened and assure us that it was all leading somewhere. But in reality, some experiences don't work that way. Sometimes the honest answer is, I really don't know what this means yet. And hope doesn't have to mean believing everything will turn out well. Maybe it can simply mean remaining available to the possibility that something different might happen. And if we don't have to have everything resolved, maybe we won't always get a clear rule either. Which brings us to Icarus. We're usually told his story as a warning against arrogance. Don't fly too high. Don't get too close to the sun. Don't let ambition get the better of you. But Daedalus actually gave Icarus two warnings. Don't fly too high, and don't fly too low. Because the sea could ruin his wings just as easily as the sun could. Which makes the story less about ambition and more about balance. There are two ways to lose your footing. You can reach too far, or you could refuse to reach at all. You can let yourself believe you're invincible, or you can become so afraid of falling that you never really even leave the ground. Most of us spend our lives somewhere in that narrow space between the two, trying to figure out how much is enough. How much control is useful before it becomes rigidity? How much spontaneity is freeing before it becomes chaos? How much caution keeps us safe before it starts keeping us small? How much ambition gives our lives direction before it starts consuming them? There isn't a formula for that. And that is admittedly annoying. But it does give us a different way to think about the gods. Maybe they aren't examples of how to behave. Maybe they're reminders of the forces that move through us. Athena, when we're strategizing. Ares, when we're spoiling for a fight. You know those days. Aphrodite, when desire suddenly rearranges our priorities. Hermes, when we're moving so quickly we don't notice what we're leaving behind. Dionysus, when we desperately need to stop being productive and remember how to be alive. And Demeter actually gives us one of the clearest examples of what it can look like when one of those forces takes over. Her daughter Persephone is taken to the underworld, and Demeter is devastated. Not just politely sad, not sad for an appropriate amount of time, devastated. She stops functioning. She stops the earth from functioning. The fields go barren, the world goes cold, and eventually a compromise is struck. Persephone spends part of the year below and part of the year above, and the earth follows Demeter's grief. It dies back when Persephone descends, and it blooms again when she returns. And I think about that story when people apologize for grieving too long or for needing a season of low light before they can bloom again. The Greeks imagined a world in which grief could change the landscape. Nobody told Demeter to hurry up. Nobody said, all right, you've had enough time now. Summer needs to happen. The universe waited, and then it built a rhythm around her sorrow. Not once, every single year. And that's beautiful. Not because grief is beautiful, because it isn't, but because the story refuses to make grief a character flaw. It treats it as a force, because it's something that changes us. It's something we have to learn to live alongside rather than conquer. And maybe that's what all these gods are giving us. Not instructions for becoming better people, obviously. Not a list of personalities to choose from, just a way of noticing what is already happening inside us. None of these parts gets to be the whole story, and none of them needs to be banished. But it does help to know who's in the room. All right, so here's a slightly ridiculous experiment I'd like you to try this week, if you're willing. Don't ask yourself what kind of person you're supposed to be. Ask yourself which god seems to have taken over. Look at the week you're actually having, not the one you intended to have. And definitely not the one you're going to have next week once you've finally gotten your life together. This week, right now, today, who's been running things? Who has been grabbing the microphone? Once you figure that out, give them one sentence. What would that god say about the week you're having? Maybe Aries would say, I'm surrounded by idiots. Maybe Athena would say, I've already solved this problem and nobody has noticed. Maybe Aphrodite would say, oh, I know it's impractical and I don't care. Maybe Demeter would say, something in me needs to rest right now. Maybe Hermes would say, hey, wait, where are we going? You don't have to fix the god. You don't have to defeat the god. You don't even have to become a better person because of the god. Just notice. Awareness is usually the first form of agency. Because once you can name what's happening, you have at least a little more choice about what happens next. And perhaps that's the real gift buried beneath all these ridiculous, dramatic, deeply dysfunctional stories. They're not instructions for becoming perfect, not proof that the universe has a plan, just a reminder that being human has always been complicated. People have always been contradictory. We've always wanted two incompatible things at the same time. We've always made choices we regretted and then had to figure out what came next. The Greeks just gave those contradictions names and put them in pretty sandals. So you don't need to believe in Olympus. You only need to notice who's running your household this week. And if it turns out to be a small committee of contradictory, occasionally ridiculous forces arguing over the controls, well, apparently that's been the arrangement for a very, very long time. Hey, with that, you made it through the first episode of season 5. If you liked what you hear, please subscribe to the None But Curious podcast. Find me at None But Curious all over the web, all over social media, nonebutcurious.org if you'd like to visit the website, or do none of that at all. I'm just glad that you're back here and you're spending time with me, and I look forward to spending more time with you next time. And until then, stay curious.